Hello, and welcome to Saving People, Queering Things, a supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we will be discussing Season 1, Episode 2, Wendigo, through the theme of belonging. I'm Abigail, your host and genderqueer previous Dean cosplayer. With me today is Sam, my sister, and the Sam to my Dean. Also with me today is my best friend, Hana, who has extensive show knowledge thanks to being friends with me, despite having only seen what is now 3 episodes. Sam.
Hi, this is Hana.
Hi, I'm Sam.
Thanks so much for joining me today. This is fun. So to start, we're going to do a series recap, the road so far of what's happened in the show from its beginning to the point we're at now, which is only 2 episodes in. In the pilot, we meet the Winchester family. We see Mary Winchester's death by some unknown monster, and we see a time jump where her sons have grown up in this world of hunting, and Dean, the older brother, is now off hunting with his father, and Sam, the younger brother, has gone off to college. The pilot picks up with the boys as Dean arrives at Stanford to tell Sam that their father is missing. And Sam goes with him. They hunt a monster. And when Dean returns Sam to Stanford, Sam finds his girlfriend also dead in the exact same way that their mother died. Sam then goes with Dean to attempt to find their father and discover what has happened to both Mary and his girlfriend. And the pilot episode ends with the iconic line, "We've got work to do." So what we're going to do now is our 30-second recap. So how this works, if you're new to the show and for the benefit of my co-hosts, we are going to set a timer for 30 seconds. You're going to recap as much as you can of the episode. Whatever you think is important to include, that can be as serious or as frivolous as you so desire. We've got 3 of us, so hopefully between the 3 of us, we can get at least, the most important things. When you are ready. Okay. On your marks, get set, go.
So the episode starts with Sam and Dean on the road following their father's journal, which takes them to the middle of nowhere wilderness, some black something ridge, where it turns out there's a lot more going on and a lot less of their dad. They run into this really sweet woman and her sort of broken family, her and her 2 brothers, one of whom has been missing. It turns out there's a history of people disappearing in these woods. They follow it out. It turns out it's a Wendigo. They save the day with fire. And there's a lot of, winky winky and a lot of bonding along the way.
Wow.
Nice.
Impressive. That was a good 30-second recap. Nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
So for a little bit of context, Hannah and I were part of the same friend group back in high school. We were all a little bit obsessed with Supernatural. Most of us actually watched the show. Hannah didn't watch the show, but was very involved in all of our headcanoning and role playing and conversations and in-depth like analysis of the show, despite having not seen it. So
very successfully. It was an unintentional con.
It really was. So much so that I routinely forget how little of the show you've actually seen. Now 3 episodes. So you've seen the pilot, you've seen this episode, and you've seen Faith, which is also in season 1.
Yep, which is about, and I think 30 minutes of the finale. So I'm a really well-rounded.
When you are ready.
Okay, fine. I won't be more ready than I am right now.
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so this episode takes place almost entirely in the woods, where the boys are following these siblings who are looking for their brother who's missing, and they've also come to this place which is coordinates for what their dad left them, and they hunt a crazy monster who's kind of a cannibal, and then they kill him with fire, and the end.
That's good. That's good. Like a different tack, but it worked. It included some stuff that wasn't in the other recap. Yeah,
I like it.
I think I'm going to go an entirely different route.
Of course
Alright.
you are.
Do it.
Because
You got it.
I'm going to recap the emotional journey
Oh, of course.
because it's the main thing that hasn't been covered at this point. There's not much else to say about the actual plot.
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so the episode opens with Sam having a nightmare about Jess, and then they go to the coordinates that their dad left them, and they're hunting this monster. And they're also trying to protect this family that's looking for their missing brother. And Sam's on this real emotional journey of anger and frustration. And why do we have to save these people? And Dean's trying to convince him that the job is not just finding their dad, but also saving people, hunting things, family business. And then they hunt the monster and they save the people. And Sam gets on board with not only finding dad, but saving people.
Nice.
I liked that tack. Yeah. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so the episode opens with Sam having a nightmare about Jess, and then they go to the coordinates that their dad left them, and they're hunting this monster. And they're also trying to protect this family that's looking for their missing brother. And Sam's on this real emotional journey of anger and frustration. And why do we have to save these people? And Dean's trying to convince him that the job is not just finding their dad, but also saving people, hunting things, family business. And then they hunt the monster and they save the people. And Sam gets on board with not only finding dad, but saving people.
Nice.
I liked that tack. Yeah.
So as a note, this first part of the discussion that you're going to hear was recorded about halfway through our episode, but we decided that it needed to be at the front of our episode because it's discussing the elements of this monster of the week and the lore that's presented in the show and how that interacts with specifically Indigenous stories and some of the issues around cultural appropriation. And as we were talking about this partway through our show, we realized that this discussion belonged at the beginning because it really sets a framework for understanding how we want to look at the show, how we need to look at the show, and how we need to grapple with what it's doing and how it's misusing or misappropriating elements of cultures that it doesn't have a right to do. And we want to make sure that we take time to talk those through, to actually educate ourselves and to do that well. So to the best of our abilities, recognizing we are not experts in this, we're going to present that part of our discussion first before we jump into our full theme discussion. So one thing we need to talk about in terms of this episode is some of the lore that comes up, specifically the lore around the monster of this episode. I think Hannah, you've got some more insight and some more information about that. So I'm going to pass it to you if that's all right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just, chime in, direct me. Largely, I think the thing that's most important is to recognize that, and I grew up hearing them referred to as Wendigos, not Wendigos. So I don't know if that's a Canadian difference or if it's a supernatural difference, are culturally appropriated from sort of a large amalgamation of Native American, specifically North American Indigenous tribes and nations. And I will say that my knowledge is shaky, right? I am not Native. I know what I have read on the internet, what I have heard from my friends, and what I sort of know from the local lore where I've grown up. I'm from New Mexico. I'm one of the few US people on the show, but growing up on like Pueblo lands. I will say, right, one thing in the episode, Dean refers to Wendigos as well as a shapeshifter monster that a monster, right, in the context of the show, this monster of the week format, that where I'm from, you don't even say the name of. It's sort of spoken as an invitation, or sort of like an opening And so people tend not to say the name, or if they do, it's fairly rarely. My understanding is it's fairly similar for Wendigo, but it's also lessened because Wendigos have entered sort of the broader monster lore, right? There's all sorts of interesting stories, both because I think humans are fascinated with cannibalism, right? This really horrific practice that crops up across humanity. So my understanding, and I, as my like primary source, I'm referencing a blog article off Mysterious Universe called "The Why the Wendigo Is Not My Monster." And it's sort of written from the perspective of looking at Wendigos as culturally appropriated ideas, and then looking at how we as people outside of those traditions do or do not have access to them. The primary idea being that the understanding we have of Wendigos and monster lore is horribly sort of misinformed and malformed. And that in reality, they're a much heavier and more serious topic, the kind of thing, again, that you don't talk about, that you take really, really seriously, that people have, again, those personal experiences or their family has experienced. And rather than being somebody who ate other people and became this horrible monster that's driven by eternal hunger, it's rooted in these cultural ideas that are sort like deeply inaccessible to Western epistemologies and is coming from other cosmologies, and is rooted in this idea of greed, of sort of greed is the antithesis to community, right? So this idea of taking for yourself and hoarding it for yourself. And the idea, right, that the Wendigo as it actually exists and interacts with these indigenous nations is not mythology, but something that people actively like respect and talk about in a way. And so obviously we're talking about supernatural and how they interact with the monster of the week and how it plays into their narrative. And I think we're doing like a really good job of looking at that really seriously, as serious as you can probably take supernatural per se. I think we might be probably a primary source for that, taking supernatural seriously. But yeah, I really appreciate us taking the time to sort of like recognize that even as we're talking about the lore of the show, it's being pulled from like this history of coloniality and violence and misinterpreting like sacred knowledge for the sake of a CW show. Yeah, I think that's what I found. That's I really appreciate you giving me the time to say it. I don't know, what do you have to add to that?
I don't have a lot to add. I want to say thank you for like making sure that we talked about this, because I think with something like this, it's really easy to fall into the, oh, well, it's, just the lore of a show. They're just pulling from, and Supernatural does this throughout its whole existence, pulls from many different sources of lore. But recognizing that when a North American show, largely created by white people, colonizers, do use indigenous lore and change it and shift it and use it as a narrative device and use it in different ways, that can be appropriation, that can be harmful, and that we need to take time to recognize that that's happening potentially in this show. And that, yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, it's important that we slow down and go, this is here, but this was not actually something that should have really been taken and misappropriated in this way. And we want to recognize the history and the importance of that history for the people who actually own that story.
Yeah, I would just say thank you, Hannah, for that education. I think it's really important that you shared that, and that's not something that I knew, or probably something that I would have ever really known or looked up or even thought about. So I appreciate that education for sure.
I think one of the other things that I would add, right, that I've learned is stories of the Wendigo are also seasonal and told only at specific times to specific groups of people, right? It's the sort of like sacred insider knowledge. So not only do we not have the full story, but it's sacred to specific times of the year. So also like further digging might be inappropriate for specific times. So sort of respecting how much we do understand about the actual lore. And then Dr. Dillon, right, is referenced in this article that I mentioned. And this researcher recommends really reframing how we think of the Wendigo as moving away from the monster or the evil spirit sort of analogy, or even the sort of current psychosis definition, and towards a something that's, again, beyond all that, sort of rooted in this indigenous knowledge that we don't have access to and not something that we come from. So sort of breaking apart, even though we're talking about it as a monster in context of this like Monster of the Week series, when we use the term monster, we're referring to the narrative genre and not to the concept of the entity.
Yes, I think that's a really important note. Thank you for clarifying that and clarifying the way we want to be using language when we talk about this as we go forward in the rest of this episode. So thanks for making sure that that's a thing that we're doing well. Okay, so we are now going to move into our theme discussion. So for those of you who are maybe just joining us, every week we choose a theme prior to watching the episode. We look for that theme or connections to that theme within the episode, and then we're just going to kind of talk about that, using that as a lens to explore what's going on in the plot, what's going on with the characters. So today's theme is the theme of belonging. I'll let either of you start if you have anything.
So I'll take sort of the low-hanging fruit, perchance, from this episode, but I think right, Abigail sort of recapped the emotional journey of the episode, as you said, and leaning into that sort of like, obviously the brothers bond is the heart of the show, right? That's, we call them the boys, the brothers is how we refer to them. The emotional narrative of Sam not only not wanting to be hunting again, and not only not wanting to be on the road, but really wanting to go back to Jess, right? Emotionally, physically, right? He talks about like, I wish we had never left Stanford, maybe we should left too soon. And the way that Dean sort of gets through to him and talks about breaking down that anger, and the way that he restores that brother bond is by focusing on the family that they're saving, right? These two siblings with no parents trying to find their other brother. And the sort of like implied relationship there is, and maybe not, it's explicit at some points, right? He talks about like, if our family's so fucked up, the least thing we can do is look out for another family. But the sort of implicit, like, look, you see how desperately they're reaching out for each other, and like what they would do for their brother is what I would do for you. And sort of that they don't have parents is mentioned several times. The fact that they only have each other is mentioned several times. And that sort of like belonging to each other as being the reason to do the hunt. Really, one, delicious, absolutely lovely, right? To see on screen, like, yes, this is why we're here. This is what I'm excited for. Dig into this tension.
Yes.
But I think it's really interesting too when you look at it in terms of like hunting and Dean's sort of, it's a family business, right? That classic line crops up here. So not only belonging to each other, but belonging to the hunt, so to speak.
Yeah, I actually had some of what I was thinking was about that whole belonging to the hunt of Sam definitely knows he belongs to the family, knows he belongs like to the family, for him being both Dean and John and also Jess and his mom. So like that whole, those are who encompasses his family. But Sam at the beginning really doesn't belong to the hunt, like not as an idea. It's not like the idea of being a hunter. He doesn't belong to the group of like hunters who save people and hunt things. He belongs to the family unit and to the idea of getting out of hunting in a lot of ways. And Dean kind of has to convince him. Like Sam, I wrote down like Sam only belongs to one mission, which is to find Dad, find Jess's killer, and then presumably go back to a different life. Right. Whereas Dean very clearly belongs to the hunting world. We even see this in what their expertise is. Like Dean's the one that talks a lot of the lore, where he's like instantly goes to, oh, you know, based on these things, it could be a black dog, it could be a shapeshifter, and like he has all that sort of stored like right at the top of his memory, because he belongs to that world very actively, Sam has to do a little bit more work to get there because he's still kind of actively resisting being a part of that world. And I also thought about what Sam says about John, where when they're talking like midway through the episode, and Sam says, like, why doesn't he just call? Like, why is Dad making it so difficult for us to contact him? And I was thinking about like the idea that belonging sometimes feels like it should be like a straightforward thing. You're a part of this family, so you obviously feel like you belong. You're a part of this family, so you do the obvious thing and you call your kids. We're going to talk a lot about John Winchester's shitty parenting in future episodes, but like belonging isn't always like straightforward. And Dina sort of got the nuance of that, I think, in a way that Sam doesn't quite at this point. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And Dean also even says that with the family, in terms of like the link, the mirroring of their family they're rescuing, and Sam and Dean says to, I think Haley is the girl's name, and he says, you know what, when she's talking about how her siblings stick together because they don't have parents, Dean says, like, I think I know how you feel. The same, yeah, that identification of like family, siblings, specifically siblings, belong together.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that speaks to the difference between belonging as a sort of obligation and belonging as a choice, right? Very easily mirrored in these two brothers, but also like in the choices that they're making throughout this episode and how the nuance of that term, right? Especially as you're talking about it in terms of siblings, right? The number of people, I was talking to someone the other day who said, I can't imagine placing your family before your partner or even on the same level. Like, they're just your family. They're just a group of people who happen to raise you. Versus I know that, like, for myself, my siblings are my ride or die. Those people are some of the most important people in my life. And again, that sort of like mixture of obligation, of choice, of when is it a choice that you were sort of forced into? When is it something that you're making freely, right? Free will is such a, I've heard it's a big theme in the show from my readings.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because it is a link right here to Sam's exercise of free will in terms of family and in terms of who he's choosing to belong to. He chose distinctly to leave the hunting world, to, in a lot of senses, leave his family and to belong to a different world with Jess very distinctly. But yet without telling her all of the elements of his experience and his history. And now he's sort of locked in between of like, Jess isn't around anymore for him to belong to, but he still wants to belong to her and to her memory and to her, the mission of like, this is why I'm here. He's like, I don't want to give up that belonging. And he doesn't quite know, I think, how he wants to belong to Dean specifically. He's going to kind of be on that journey. Like, even in this episode, he goes from like at the beginning being really distinctly like, I'm only here for this reason. We find Dad, we find Jess's killer. By the end of the episode, he's like, if we have to hunt some things along the way, I'm going to exert my belonging too in like, I'm going to drive Dean's car and exert the fact that I belong here and that I'm a part of this. This partnership. And this will come up all through the show, is that everyone they interact with belongs to one of two groups. They either are people who know about and believe in the supernatural, or they're people who don't. Either because they haven't, and generally, not exclusively, but generally, people either believe in the supernatural because they've experienced it or someone close to them has experienced it, or they don't believe in it because they've never experienced it and it's myths and legends and it's not reality to them. And I was thinking about how some belonging kind of only comes with experience, especially related to like trauma. Like some things you only belong to, some groups you only belong to because of your shared trauma. And experiencing the supernatural, experiencing monsters, is a trauma for like every single person in Supernatural. Like for Sam and Dean, for their parents, for this family. And I was thinking about the idea of like trauma entering you into belonging, and that they are, Sam and Dean kind of they not welcome, but they walk the experience of this family becoming a part of that belonging and a part of that community of people who have experienced the supernatural from the beginning of the episode, where they think it's just a bear. And yes, that's a trauma and it's scary, but they walk them through they walk them across that bridge of like the before, when you didn't believe, the before when the worst thing that could happen in the woods was a bear is doing what bears do in the woods, to the worst thing that can happen in the woods is that there's a literal monster hunting you.
Yeah.
I really like how you put that.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting, like how that kind of shifts. Like I feel like there are kind of three groups. There's Sam and Dean, who obviously believe in the monsters and have that knowledge. Then there's the siblings who are skeptical at first and then come around and believe Sam and Dean and kind of become part of that group of belonging to that, kind of becoming a team with fighting this thing and all believing that it's a monster. And then we have the ranger guide person,
Roy,
who's the whole time a skeptic and not
that's true.
believing. And that's kind of throughout, like he's kind of outside of that group. Like the four of them are kind of united in believing that the Wendigo is real and dangerous. But Roy, the whole time, he's convinced that it's a bear until he gets separated from the group and then dies. He doesn't ever belong to the group.
It's interesting, his like when you think about his skepticism, because that was another note I wrote down. Down when Dean says nobody likes a skeptic, Roy, which is really ironic when you think about Dean's whole character arc, because we're going to see him both like be really willing to believe in supernatural things and also be a total skeptic himself, particularly when it comes to any supernatural being that's not evil. So we're going to see we're going to see also that skepticism in Dean. But yeah, it's really interesting. Roy does stand kind of outside of that and never gets the chance because he doesn't survive it.
I would say, like, to sort of build on that, right, the sort of classic skeptic versus believer dichotomy, right? X-Files being the like classic choice.
Yeah. We had an X-Files reference in the pilot. We pointed it out because Dean calls a pair of agents Mulder and Scully.
Yeah.
I think it's required. I think they influence each other more than they want to admit.
Yeah.
But in terms of, right, the groups like you were talking about, and that Sam sort of, our own Sam built on, sort of narratively, the idea of if you belong to Sam and Dean in this situation, your chances of surviving go up. Mm-hmm. Right? Not only is it like skeptic versus believer, but in bringing it back to belonging, Roy, right, was safest when he was with Sam and Dean, regardless of how he believed, what he believed about the monster, how he believed it happened. As long as he belonged to Sam and Dean, he was safe. And literally, as soon as he stepped outside that safe circle is when he left. And the way that that's sort of tied to his skepticism, right? He wasn't willing to believe them about what he needed to do to be safe, about his own chances. Versus, right, the siblings early on are kind of skeptical of Dean and Sam themselves, even if they're willing to believe what they're saying, but that belief is what kept them safe, right? Is that Sam and Dean on the other side being like, we are responsible for keeping these people safe. It's our responsibility. This is the only way they're going to make it out, and sort of like collect these ragtag monster of the group sort of collections of people that belong to them for right now in this situation, sort of as the other to the monster.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And that kind of links to a thing that I also noticed, that like we get, as soon as Sam kind of makes that choice that like saving these people is important, like I don't think he ever thinks that they should die, but he's sort of like, it's secondary to, he's like, why don't we just like leave now, find Dad? But once like he buys into this, that these people need to be saved and they need to look for their brother, Sam like instantly like takes charge of like making them a unit. He instantly is like giving, like I had forgotten that, because we're gonna see Sam kind of struggle with how to be a leader in the supernatural world, but like this is the first instance where Dean like lets Sam kind of be like, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this is what we need to do, this is the plan. And that's Sam's like taking charge of his own belonging and taking charge of his own place, and even creating that space for the family for these people to belong to Sam and Dean, in order to save them.
And bringing it back, like the same thing that we were just talking about, right? If you tie that back to Dean knowing something's wrong with Sam and offering him to drive the car, right? Talk about a role shift, talk about letting him literally take charge, take the lead.
Yeah.
Or also you can look at when Dean sort of goes on his own. Yeah, he's leading in the sense that it's his plan and he's going to go off and stand alone against the Wendigo. But he also places Sam in this paternal role with the family unit that they're caring for, and hands him the journal, right, of his dad the night before. So there's this very literal passing the torch of, I've been dad. Why don't you take the reins for a little bit and you make those choices that are going to buy you into this?
Well, yeah, exactly. It's that's the buy-in. It's he's recognizing Sam needs that opportunity to like not just be told what to do, which we're gonna see was a very common pattern of their childhood. Sam is like, the chain of command in their family has always gone like John, Dean, Sam. And Dean, they've only been hunting, this is only the second hunt they've done together. And Dean's already like, for you to believe in this, I have to do differently than what dad has done with me and what dad has done with you. I have to let you buy in by like giving you the opportunity, by trusting you, by trusting that you can keep your emotions under control, by trusting that you can make the right call, by trusting that you are an expert and know what you're doing and that you will protect these people to the best of your ability.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think also Dean knows that by giving Sam some of those reins, it will help him to feel more a part of it and to feel more like he belongs in this world. Kind of giving him that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's really true. So now we're going to move from our theme discussion into our counter segments. Better Name is coming. We are keeping track of a few things as we watch through the show, kind of checking how often they happen. So the first counter that we have is a major character death counter. We left that counter at 2 from the pilot. Does one of you want to update us? Do we have any additions in this episode of major character deaths?
I would say not major character.
Our second counter is the Bechdel test. We will probably not explain this every time, but for a brief explanation, the Bechdel test is a really low bar understanding of how female characters are treated in media, and what for a piece of media to pass the Bechdel test, it has to have 2 named female characters who have a conversation with each other about something that is not a man. Obviously, this is a super low bar for the representation of female characters, but we are still in a place, and this show started back in 2005. We are still in a place where this is very, very necessary, because a lot of shows, a lot of stories, unfortunately, do not pass this test. And that leads me to, does this episode pass this test at any point?
Well, since there's only one female character.
There's one female character. To be fair, this episode mostly takes place with only 5 main characters. However, 4 of them are male, which is really unfortunate. The third counter we're kind of keeping track of is plot point related. So are there any major plot points that are teased or things that are just not followed through on? I don't think we have any like major plot things that aren't going to kind of continue through. The conflict in this episode, the monster in this episode, is not one that's going to become a huge piece of lore. It's going to be a piece of lore, but it's not going to be a huge plot point, and they're still on the quest of find dad. We haven't really had any updates to that other than that they went to the first location of John's coordinates and they didn't find dad. We are also going to add a fourth counter that I thought of today. So Sam and I both grew up in the Vancouver, British Columbia area, which is where most of Supernatural was filmed, in Vancouver and the kind of surrounding cities. So one counter we thought would be kind of fun to add is there a location we've been to that's distinct in the episode? Because when we were watching this episode, when they got to the mine and we're starting to look in, I said to myself, I bet that I know where that is. I bet that I have been to that area. That looks like, I bet that that's the case. And I looked it up, and that mine is Britannia Mine. It's a historical mine here in British Columbia. And we've taken school field trips to it. So
multiple school field trips.
Yeah. Last but not least, our final segment is going to be kind of a predictions and hopes segment. So what we are looking forward to based on this episode, based on the road so far, what are we hoping for going forward? What do we want to see coming up for the boys?
I would say, I think I may have said this in the previous episode, and this is always something that I'm looking forward to, is just the development of the brothers' relationship. And especially Sam, I have a special place in my heart for Sam, not just because he's my name twin. That's part of it for sure. But him being the younger sibling and feeling very deeply about things and having all these internal struggles. I'm always fascinated by his story and his character book development. So I'm excited for seeing more of that.
I have to echo Sam a little bit, right? That development of the brothers' relationship. I'm a huge sucker.
That's why we're all here, really.
Right, we know what we're about. I would say I'm also really excited, specifically to to actually watch Sam's development and growth into not Sam Winchester, little brother, not Sam Winchester, Stanford attendee, but Sam Winchester, the next evolution where he's going in his relationship with Dean as a hunter. I think that's such an interesting narrative, both to watch it from Dean's perspective, as I too also have eldest sibling chronic wasting disease. But to really see Sam come into his own. I echo you. I have a special heart for Sam. I think he's underrated, and I think it's absolutely delightful to sort of watch that internal monologue develop really subtly.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I mean, obviously, kind of all the same things that both of you said. I'm excited to pay attention to what's happening in their sort of family development. Like, we talked a lot in this episode about belonging and about what does that mean in a family, and specifically what does that mean for siblings. And I think prior to Sam leaving for Stanford, we had the sense of the three of them belonged together, John and Sam and Dean. But after Stanford, we're never really going to entirely see that family. Like, we're going to see that family unit. Spoiler alert. Eventually they're going to find John. I don't think 15-year-old show. I think we can safely say the plot of this season is to find John. They're eventually going to find him. But we're going to see that something has shifted in terms of their family dynamics, and that really the relationship where there's this sense of belonging, reciprocal belonging, is in Sam and Dean. And I'm interested to see how they develop that, the two of them, and also how that diverges from their relationship with John, and how they redefine family in a new way throughout this season, but also going forward. Is there anything else that either of you thinks is important, would like to say about this episode, about anything? You two are wonderful. This was really, really fun.
Yeah, this was fun.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to Sam and to Hannah for being my amazing co-hosts this time. And thank you to anyone who is listening for coming along for the ride. Next week, we will be discussing Season 1, Episode 3, Dead in the Water, the theme of fear. A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our Season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.